The jet was 40,000 feet in the air. There was no way out. And Lieutenant Amara Osei, decorated Kenyan Navy officer, woman who had stared down pirates in the Indian Ocean without blinking, was standing in the middle of a private jet that cost more than her entire country's naval budget, holding a phone she was never supposed to touch, staring at photos that could bring down governments. 3 governments, to be exact. The man sitting across from her, the one with the jawline carved by angels who clearly had a grudge against her peace of mind, the one in the $300,000 suit, the one whose dark eyes were currently looking at her like she was something between a problem and a prayer. That man was not just any man. He was Park Seon-jae. And every intelligence agency on the planet had a file on him. She had one too. She'd read it 14 times. She was not supposed to be attracted to him. She really was not supposed to have kissed him 20 minutes ago. And she was absolutely, under no circumstances, supposed to know what she now knew. He rose slowly from his seat. 6 feet 2 inches of controlled danger moving toward her like a storm deciding whether to rain or destroy everything in its path. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet. That terrifying kind of quiet that meant he'd already decided something. "Put the phone down, Lieutenant." She lifted her chin. "Make me." And that right there, was the moment everything changed. Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get into this story. Lieutenant Amara Osei had survived 3 piracy standoffs, 2 monsoon deployments, and 1 very ill-advised situationship with a fellow officer who turned out to collect ceramic frogs unironically. She was not the kind of woman who scared easily. But standing outside the briefing room at 0500 hours on a Tuesday, holding a file stamped classified in 4 languages, she felt something very close to the sensation a normal person might call dread. She opened the door. Rear Admiral Kamau was already seated, which was never a good sign. The Admiral only arrived early when the news was catastrophic. "Osei." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She sat. She kept her face perfectly neutral. She had practiced this expression in the mirror. She called it her "I am absolutely fine and this is fine" face. She deployed it often. "You've been requested," the Admiral said, sliding the file across the table, "for an undercover intelligence assignment." "I'm Navy," she said. "We do ships, water, the ocean, that kind of thing. This assignment involves a private yacht and a jet." He paused. "And a man named Park Seon-jae." The air in the room shifted. Amara kept her face neutral. Inside, her brain was screaming. Park Seon-jae. She knew that name. Every intelligence officer in East Africa, Southeast Asia, and half of Europe knew that name. Head of the Park Syndicate. Rumored to control supply chains across 12 countries. Officially, he was a businessman, luxury real estate, private aviation, high-end hospitality. Unofficially, he was the kind of man who made presidents nervous and Interpol agents drink heavily. He was also, according to every photograph in the file she now held, devastatingly, criminally, offensively attractive. She noted this observation. She filed it under irrelevant. She locked the filing cabinet. She threw away the key. "What exactly is the assignment?" she asked. "He's hiring cabin crew for a series of private flights over the next 3 weeks. We have intelligence suggesting he'll be transporting something significant. Documents, data, we're not sure yet. You'll go in as crew. Observe. Report. Do not engage beyond what's necessary." "Do not engage," she repeated. "You have a habit of engaging, Osei." "I engage strategically." The Admiral looked at her the way her mother looked at her when she said she'd only have 1 piece of chin-chin and then ate the entire bowl. "The cover is airtight. Your cabin crew certification is real. You completed it 3 years ago during the Maritime Hospitality Intelligence Program." She had, in fact, completed it. She had also complained about it every single day for the entire 3 weeks, but that was beside the point. "And if things go sideways?" she asked. "They won't. But if they do?" Admiral Kamau folded his hands on the table. Then you'll handle it. Because you always do. He paused. Also, we'll have an extraction team on standby. How far on standby? A pause that lasted slightly too long. 45 minutes. 45, she stopped. She breathed. Fine. She picked up the file. When do I start? Tomorrow. 0800. Seoul. She stood, tucked the file under her arm, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. Admiral. Just to clarify, this is a surveillance assignment. I go in, I watch, I report, I come home. Correct. I don't talk to him beyond what's required. Correct. I absolutely do not, under any circumstances, do anything stupid. The Admiral's expression flickered with something that looked uncomfortable. That's always the goal, Lieutenant. She walked out. She had a very bad feeling about this. She landed in Seoul at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, running on 3 hours of sleep, one in-flight coffee that tasted like ambition and regret, and a carry-on bag packed with 2 uniforms, her service weapon in a compartment so hidden it would make a customs agent weep, and a framed photo of her grandmother, Nana Abina, who had once told her, Amara baby, trouble always wears a handsome face. That's how it gets inside. She had not understood that advice at 19. She was beginning to understand it now. The briefing had described the Park Syndicate's private terminal as discreet. That was like describing the Indian Ocean as a bit damp. The terminal was a glass and steel cathedral of quiet power, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. She walked through it in her navy blue crew uniform, fitted blazer, tailored trousers, the small silver wings pinned at her lapel that marked her as senior cabin crew, and kept her expression perfectly bored, because bored was safer than impressed, and impressed was safer than absolutely terrified. A woman in a charcoal suit appeared from nowhere and fell into step beside her. Korean, mid-30s, with the energy of someone who had not slept voluntarily since 2019. Ms. Osei. She didn't wait for confirmation. I'm Ji-yun, head of Mr. Park's logistics. You're replacing our last senior crew member, who had she paused, selecting her word carefully, scheduling conflict. She quit, Amara translated mentally. She took one look at this assignment and ran. I have your schedule for the next 3 weeks, Ji-yun continued, handing her a slim tablet. Mr. Park values discretion above everything. What happens on the jet stays on the jet. You will not discuss passengers, cargo, destinations, or conversations with anyone outside this operation. You will sign an NDA before boarding. Of course, Amara said pleasantly. She had absolutely no intention of keeping that NDA. Mr. Park boards in 40 minutes, Ji-yun said. He doesn't like to be kept waiting. He doesn't like excessive conversation. He doesn't like... The doors at the far end of the terminal opened. And Amara Osei, who had stared down armed pirates, who had kept her voice steady in the middle of a firefight, who had once talked a man off a ledge in 3 languages. Amara stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. Park Seon-jae walked in like gravity had rearranged itself specifically to accommodate him. He was taller than the photographs suggested. Broader. The dark suit was impeccable. His black hair was slightly pushed back, like he'd run a hand through it recently and simply refused to be anything other than perfect. His jaw could have been used to cut the glass walls of this terminal. He was, objectively, the most beautiful and most dangerous thing she had ever seen in her life. She filed that under irrelevant. She locked that cabinet harder. His eyes swept the terminal with the kind of practiced ease that saw everything and revealed nothing, and then they landed on her. He stopped walking. Just for a half-second. So brief that Ji-yun didn't notice. So brief that Amara almost convinced herself she imagined it. Then he moved again, smooth and unhurried, and Ji-yun was introducing her and Amara was saying all the right words in all the right order because she was a professional, she was a Navy lieutenant, she had trained for exactly this kind of situation. The kind where you had to stand in front of a very dangerous person and pretend your heart wasn't doing something deeply unprofessional inside your chest. Ms. Osei. His voice was low and precise. Accented English, deliberate and unhurried. He looked at her the way you looked at something that surprised you but you weren't going to admit it. Mr. Park, she said. Welcome aboard. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more dangerous than a smile. "Let's go," he said. She followed him toward the jet. Nana Abina, she thought, you were so right. The jet was obscene. Amara had been on military aircraft that carried 40 people and smelled like jet fuel and bad decisions. She had been on commercial flights where the best thing on offer was a pack of pretzels and a middle seat next to someone who had never heard of deodorant. She had never, in her 31 years of life, been on anything like this. The Park Syndicate's Gulfstream G700 was approximately the size of a small luxury apartment, furnished like a five-star hotel by someone who had never been told the word budget and would not understand it if they had. Cream leather. Dark mahogany. Soft lighting that made everything look like a perfume advertisement. There was a bedroom in the back. She kept her eyes away from that, because her brain had already started down a road she needed to close immediately, and a dining area, and a full bar stocked with bottles that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Her job, officially, was to manage the cabin. Beverages. Meals. Comfort. The invisible, seamless kind of service that rich people expected and never thought to say thank you for. She could do invisible. She was trained for invisible. What she was not trained for was Park Seon-jae sitting 6 feet away from her, jacket now off, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. Why, she thought, why do forearms exist? Reading documents in a silence so absolute it had weight, and somehow managing to make document reading look like the most compelling thing she had ever witnessed. She busied herself behind the galley partition, making notes in the small, encrypted device disguised as a personal phone. Flight path, Seoul to Singapore. Passenger manifest, Park Seon-jae and 2 associates. Mr. Choi, a broad-shouldered man who had the energy of a locked safe, and Ms. Yoon, who had not looked up from her laptop since boarding and appeared to subsist on iced Americanos and whatever emotion was the opposite of warmth. She catalogued everything. It was what she was here to do. What she was not supposed to do was notice that Park Seon-jae had looked up from his documents 3 times in the first 20 minutes and each time his eyes had gone directly to her. She brought him coffee, black, no sugar, she checked the file, and set it on the table beside him without a word, because Ji-yeon had said he didn't like excessive conversation and she was very committed to being professional. "You're not going to ask me if there's anything else I need," he said, without looking up. She paused. "Would you like something else, Mr. Park?" "No." He turned a page. "I just expected you to ask. I find that asking questions you already know the answer to is a waste of everyone's time." Now he looked up. His eyes were very dark. Very steady. The kind of eyes that were used to watching people and finding them predictable. She had the sudden, acute sensation that she was not, to him, predictable. "Most people who work for me," he said carefully, "don't speak to me unless spoken to." "Most people," she said, matching his tone, "aren't me." The silence between them lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, and she would replay this moment later, alone in the dark with her face buried in a pillow, he smiled. Not the almost smile from the terminal. A real one, brief and sudden and devastating, like a lightning strike that was gone before you could prove it happened. "No," he said. "I can see that." She went back to the galley and stood very still for 30 seconds, and gave herself a serious internal lecture about professionalism, mission objectives, and the fact that she was a decorated naval officer who did not get flustered. She was absolutely, marginally, minimally flustered. The trouble started at hour 3. Mr. Choi and Ms. Yoon had moved to the front of the cabin for a meeting that they clearly wanted private, speaking in rapid Korean. Amara did not speak Korean. She was learning. She had started a course 3 months ago in preparation for this assignment. She was on level 4. Her pronunciation, according to her language app, was enthusiastic. She understood approximately 40% of what they were saying. That 40% made her very, very still. She kept her body relaxed, kept moving through the cabin with the unhurried ease of someone who was simply refilling water glasses and straightening already straight cushions, while her brain was recording everything. Document transfer. Singapore. The minister's signature. If he doesn't. She didn't catch the last part. She moved past Park Seon-jae's seat and he caught her wrist. Not hard. Barely a touch. But it stopped her completely. "Sit," he said quietly. She looked at him. then at his hand on her wrist. Then back at him. "I'm working," she said. "The glasses are full. Sit." It wasn't a request. But it wasn't quite a command either. It was something in between, the kind of invitation that knew it would be accepted. She sat. He studied her for a moment, the way you studied a cipher you hadn't quite broken yet. "Where are you from?" "Kenya." "Navy." Every cell in her body went cold. She kept her face perfectly still. "Flight crew," she said. "You walk like military," he said. "You stand like military. You observe a room like—" He paused, and something moved through his expression that was almost impressed. "Like someone who was trained to." "I walk like a woman who grew up with 4 brothers," she said. "You learn to take up space or get trampled." He watched her for a long moment. "4 brothers," he said finally. "Kofi, Kwame, Kojo and Kweku. In order of chaos level." That lightning strike smile again. Gone before she could hold it. "And you?" she asked, because she was supposed to be making conversation, because that was her cover, because it was absolutely not because she wanted to know. "Any siblings?" Something shifted behind his eyes. Quick and shuttered. "A brother," he said. "Once." The weight of those 2 words landed in the space between them like something breakable. Once. She didn't push. She knew grief when she heard it. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. He looked at her like she'd surprised him again. Like sincerity was something he'd stopped expecting. "Don't be," he said quietly. And then softer, almost like he didn't intend to say it, "It was a long time ago." The jet hummed around them. Singapore was still 4 hours away. Outside the window, they were somewhere over the deep blue nothing of the ocean. Her territory technically, though this felt nothing like any ocean posting she'd ever had. "Amara," he said suddenly. She looked at him. "Your name. It means grace." He said it in Chui, his pronunciation careful and clearly researched. She felt something move in her chest that she could not afford to feel. "You looked it up," she said. "I look up everything." Should I be flattered or terrified? The corner of his mouth curved. Probably both. She stood before she could do something foolish. Like smile back. Like lean in. Like forget, for even one more second, exactly who he was and exactly why she was here. She went back to the galley. She gripped the counter. She was in so much trouble. She found the phone by accident. That was the truth, and she would maintain it under oath, under pressure, and under any amount of Park Seon-jae's unnerving direct gaze. She found it by accident. It was hour 5. Mr. Choi and Ms. Yoon had retreated to the front to sleep, which was deeply convenient. Park Seon-jae had moved to the small office space at the rear of the cabin and closed the partition behind him. She was tidying up, because that was her job, because she was a professional, and because tidying gave her hands something to do while her brain worked through everything she'd overheard. The phone had slipped between the seat cushions. Small. Matte black. No case. The kind of phone that wasn't registered to anything. A burner. She shouldn't have touched it. She absolutely should not have touched it. She touched it. It was unlocked, because of course it was, because the universe had decided today was the day it wanted to watch her make catastrophic decisions, and the screen came to life on an open image file. She looked at the first photo. Then the second. Then the third. By the fourth, her hands were completely steady, because she was trained for exactly this, for the moment when everything you suspected became undeniably, documentably, catastrophically real. Her heartbeat dropped into that slow, controlled rhythm that her training officer had called the zone and that she privately called the part where things get very real very fast. The photos were time-stamped. Geotagged. They showed a meeting. 8 men around a table, documents spread between them, faces visible and identifiable. She recognized 3 of them. One was a minister. One was a general. One was a name she had seen on Interpol's most wanted list with a reward attached that could fund her retirement 3 times over. And in the center of all of them, at the head of the table, absolutely unmistakable. "Put the phone down, Lieutenant." His voice came from directly behind her. She had not heard him move. She had not heard the partition open. She had not heard anything at all, because Park Seon-jae moved like he was made of shadow, and she was going to be furious about that later when she had time to be furious about things. She turned around slowly. He was standing close. Too close. The kind of close that in any other context, in any other life, under any other set of circumstances, might have been something else entirely. His face was very still. His eyes were reading hers the same way she'd just read those photographs. Cataloguing, assessing, deciding. "You called me Lieutenant," she said. "I know what you are," he said quietly. "I've known since Seoul." The floor of the jet felt suddenly very far from the ground. "Then you know," she said carefully, "that I can't put this down." "You can." His voice was low, controlled. "And you will. There are people in these photos who... I know who's in the photos. They're wanted by... I know. Then you understand why I can't just... Amara." Her name in his mouth again. Low and precise and doing something completely inappropriate to her nervous system. "There are things in those photographs that you are not ready to understand yet. Put the phone down and let me explain." "Or," she said. His jaw tightened. "Or I have you removed from this aircraft. We're at 40,000 feet. There are other ways to be removed from a situation." She looked at him for a long moment. Looked at the phone. Looked back at him. She was a Navy lieutenant. She had training, backup protocols, an encrypted device transmitting location data to a team 45 minutes away. She also, somewhere in the last 5 hours, had developed a problem, a significant, deeply inconvenient, professionally disqualifying problem. And that problem was standing 6 inches away from her with dark eyes full of something that looked, against all reason, like it might be genuine. She put the phone on the table. Between them. Not giving it up. Not surrendering it. Setting it down like a ceasefire. "Explain," she said. Something moved through his expression. Not quite relief, not quite surprise. Something quieter than both. He sat down across from her and he began to talk. And everything she thought she knew about Park Seon-jae began, piece by piece, to fall apart. He'd been building a case. For 3 years, operating from inside the exact network she'd been sent to investigate, Park Seon-jae had been building an evidence trail against the most powerful criminal cooperative in East Asia. Men who moved money through governments, who owned judges, who had orchestrated the death of a Korean intelligence officer named Park Seon-min. His brother. He was undercover, Seon-jae said. His voice was completely flat. The flatness of someone who had made peace with something terrible by containing it very, very tightly. He'd been inside for 2 years. They found out. A pause. "I was the one who recruited him." Amara said nothing. There were no words adequate and she knew better than to offer inadequate ones. "The people in those photographs," he continued, "are meeting in Singapore in 4 days to finalize a document that will effectively legalize the movement of their operation through 3 governments. If that document is signed," he stopped, "the case I've been building for 3 years disappears. Every witness, every piece of evidence. Gone." "You're trying to stop it," she said slowly. "From inside." "I'm the inside," he said. "I'm the one they trust. The only one who can get close enough." She looked at him. At the controlled stillness of him, the way he held every piece of himself like something that could not afford to crack. "You're not a Mafia boss," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm both," he said simply. "I built that reputation deliberately. It's the only reason they let me in the room." His eyes didn't leave hers. "And now you know. Which means you're either an asset or a problem." "I'm a Navy lieutenant on an undercover operation," she said, "which technically makes me your colleague." Something shifted in his face. So slightly. Like a key turning in a very old lock. "Colleagues," he repeated. "Working toward," she said, "what sounds like the same outcome." He looked at her the way you looked at something that had surprised you so many times you'd stopped being surprised and started being something else. Something that looked from the outside, very much like it might be the beginning of trust. "There's a meeting," he said quietly. "In Singapore. I need someone at the table who isn't already on their radar." She raised an eyebrow. You want to use me, she said. I want to work with you, he said. And then, quieter, there's a difference. I'd like it to be the second one. The jet hummed. The ocean rolled 40,000 feet below them. She had 45 minutes of extraction backup that suddenly felt very far away and also completely beside the point. She picked up the burner phone and held it out to him. Tell me everything, she said. He took the phone. Their fingers didn't quite touch. But almost. From the beginning, she added. And for the first time, Park Seon-jae looked like a man who had been carrying something alone for so long that the offer of a second pair of hands made him feel something dangerously close to undone. They landed in Singapore at dawn, when the city was pink gold and the air smelled like rain and something sweet that she couldn't name. The skyline was all glass and ambition stacked on water, and she stood on the tarmac for exactly 3 seconds before Ji-yeon materialized at her shoulder with a schedule, a room key, and the information that she had 6 hours to prepare. 6 hours. For a mission she had not been briefed on, with a man she had not been authorized to trust, in a city where she was officially just cabin crew. You look like you're calculating something, Park Seon-jae said from beside her. I'm always calculating something, she said. What's the answer? That I've made better decisions in my life. She paused. And significantly worse ones. So I'm somewhere in the middle. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one, and she filed it away in the same cabinet where she kept all the other things about him she was not supposed to be noticing. They were put up in separate suites in a hotel that made the jet look modest. Hers had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Marina Bay, a bed the size of a small continent, and a bathroom that contained a bathtub she could swim laps in. She stood in the middle of it for a long moment, in her navy blue uniform, completely incongruous in all this luxury, and had a quiet word with herself. You are a professional, she said internally. You are here to do a job. The fact that the man you are doing the job with is the most compelling person you have ever been professionally obligated to ignore is irrelevant. Focus. Her internal self looked at her with profound skepticism. Focus, she repeated firmly. Ji-yeon knocked at noon with a garment bag and the information that Mr. Park required her attendance at a dinner that evening. Not as crew. As a guest. The garment bag contained a dress the color of midnight, deep blue-black silk, long and fitted, with a neckline that was elegant and a back that was something else entirely. There was a note with it, in handwriting that was precise and slightly old-fashioned. You'll need a cover story. Tonight, you're with me. S. She held the note for a moment. Then she held the dress up against herself in the mirror. She put on the dress. He was waiting in the lobby, and she watched him see her from across the room. He went very still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his reactions. Something more involuntary than that. Something that lasted exactly long enough for her to see it before he rearranged his face into its usual composed expression and walked toward her. Lieutenant, he said quietly. You said I wasn't lieutenant tonight, she reminded him. No, he agreed. His eyes moved over her face in a way that was careful and warm and extremely not helpful to her focus. Tonight you're Amara. Tonight you're Amara. She was absolutely not going to think about the way he said her name. Who am I to you? She asked, keeping her voice professional. For the cover. A pause. Someone I trust, he said simply. She looked at him for a moment. That's a very short cover story, she said. It's the only true thing I could think of, he said. And he offered her his arm. She took it. And they walked into the most dangerous dinner of her life. The restaurant was private, a rooftop space rented out for the evening, all candlelight and the Singapore skyline spreading out beneath them like a map of everything that could go wrong. 8 people at the table, including the minister from the photographs, who turned out to be charming in the specific way that very dangerous people were often charming, and a Singaporean businessman who laughed too loudly and watched everyone too carefully. Amara smiled. She made conversation. She asked questions that sounded like polite interest and were actually intelligence gathering of the highest order. She laughed at the right moments. She deflected the wrong ones. Beside her, Park Seon-jae was everything he'd built himself to be, magnetic and controlled and just dangerous enough to make the men across the table defer to him, and she felt the performance of it, the extraordinary effort of being exactly this person in exactly this room, and underneath it she felt something that she suspected was the real man. Under the table, his hand found hers. Not romantically, or not only romantically. Grounding. Like he was checking to make sure she was still there. She squeezed back once. His thumb moved across her knuckles. She kept her face perfectly composed and thought several extremely unprofessional thoughts. After dinner, they walked along the water. The city was all light and reflection. It was, objectively, the most beautiful place she had ever stood, and it was deeply unfair that she was standing in it with exactly this problem. "You were remarkable in there," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her sideways. That almost smile. "Modest," he said. 4 brothers. Modesty wasn't a survival strategy. They walked in silence for a moment. Comfortable silence, which was somehow the most alarming development so far, because comfortable silence with someone required a level of ease that she could not afford. "Tell me something true," he said suddenly. She looked at him. "Something that isn't cover," he said. "Something real." She considered this. "I was afraid of water until I was 12, she said. "Then my brother Kwame pushed me into Lake Naivasha and I had to figure it out. Now I command naval vessels. And the fear. Still there," she said. "I just stopped letting it drive." He looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that was so unguarded it almost made her look away. "My turn?" he asked. "Your turn." "I haven't trusted anyone in 4 years," he said quietly. "Since my brother." She held his gaze. "Until approximately," he said, slower, 5 hours into a flight from Seoul to Singapore. The city shimmered around them. "Seon-jae," she said. "Amara," he said. And then he kissed her, soft and certain, like something he'd been deciding for hours and had finally decided, and she kissed him back, because she had stopped lying to herself somewhere over the ocean, and because some things were stronger than mission parameters, and because Park Seon-jae, whoever and whatever he was, kissed her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had been uncertain for a very long time. When they pulled back, the city was still there. The mission was still there. Everything was still complicated and dangerous and unresolved. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "Objectively," he agreed. "I'm still on assignment." "I know. This changes nothing about the mission." "Of course not." His forehead dropped to hers. "It changes everything else." She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stepped back, straightened her spine, and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had things to do. "Tomorrow," she said, "we finish this." "Tomorrow," he agreed. He was looking at her like she was something he hadn't known he was looking for. She walked back to the hotel and did not sleep for a single second. The meeting was at 10 a.m. in a private room on the 47th floor of a building with no sign on its door and 4 security personnel who looked like they ate steel beams for breakfast. Amara walked in wearing a different kind of armor, tailored ivory jacket, dark trousers, her hair pulled up in the kind of style that said, "I am someone you underestimate at your peril." She had her encrypted device and a secondary recorder so small it was invisible. She had 4 contingency plans. She had, somewhere beneath all of it, a heartbeat that was slightly faster than usual. She stood 2 steps behind Seon-jae and slightly to his left, which was where security stood. Except she wasn't security, she was introduced as a business associate, which the men at the table accepted because Park Seon-jae's business associates were not questioned. The document was on the table before they'd even sat down. 40 pages. Multiple copies. Flagged for signatures at the bottom. She read upside down. It was a skill she'd practiced since childhood, stealing looks at her brother's test papers. She blessed every moment of it now. The document was worse than she'd expected. Not just 3 governments. 5. A framework that would legitimize the movement of funds through shell corporations so deeply nested they'd take a decade to untangle, by which point the men in this room would have moved everything, changed everything, and insulated themselves completely. She kept her face blank and her breathing steady and her eyes moving carefully through the room. And then she saw it. 3rd chair on the left. A man she hadn't clocked from the photographs because he'd been partially obscured. Middle-aged. Ordinary-looking. The kind of man you forgot 2 minutes after meeting him. She knew him. Lieutenant Commander Otieno. Kenyan Naval Intelligence. Her own division. The floor tilted slightly under her feet. He was looking at the document with the focused attention of someone who had a stake in it. He was not here as surveillance. He was not here as an asset. He was here because he was one of them. She kept her face still. She kept breathing. She looked at Seon-jae and found that he was already looking at her, and in the half-second of eye contact between them she communicated 3 things. I know him. This is bad. Don't react. He gave the smallest possible nod. She catalogued every face, every document, every word spoken. She was also, quietly, revising every assumption she'd made about who in her chain of command knew she was here. It was Seon-jae who called for a break. 20 minutes, he said, voice pleasant and absolutely final. Gentlemen. They filed out. In the corridor, he moved close to her under the guise of a quiet conversation, his body blocking line of sight from the security cameras. Otieno, he said, voice barely above a breath. He's naval intelligence, she said, equally quiet. My division. How far up? I don't know. She paused. Far enough to know I was being sent here. Which means, he said carefully, your extraction team. May not be mine, she finished. They stood in the corridor, 6 inches apart, in the middle of the most complicated possible version of a bad situation. I need to know, she said, if you trust me. He looked at her for a moment. Completely, he said. No hesitation. No calculation. Just the word, clean and certain. Something settled in her chest. Then here's what we do, she said. She spent the remaining 15 minutes of the break moving with purpose through the building's back corridors. She'd memorized the floor plan the night before, because she was that kind of person, and found what she needed in the building's server room, a network connection she could use to transmit a copy of the documents to a contact in naval intelligence she trusted beyond Otieno's reach. Her academy mentor. The one person she'd bet her career on. She transmitted everything. Then she sent a second message, encrypted, to a different contact. Interpol. The case officer she'd worked with on a maritime smuggling operation 2 years ago. She sent it all. Evidence. Photographs. Document text. Faces. Then she walked back to the meeting room, smoothed her jacket, and sat down. Seon-jae looked at her. She gave him the smallest nod. The signing was supposed to happen at noon. At 11:47, 3 things happened simultaneously. Seon-jae stood and announced, in a voice that carried the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise it, that he would not be signing. Amara's encrypted device buzzed twice, her contact at Interpol, confirming receipt and initiating the next phase. And the door opened. Not their door. The service entrance on the far side of the room. The men who came through it were not serving coffee. What followed was exactly 14 minutes of controlled chaos that Amara navigated with the training of someone who had run extraction operations in hostile waters, and Seon-jae navigated with the training of someone who had spent 4 years preparing for this exact moment. They moved together without discussion, cutting through the confusion with the ease of 2 people who had, somewhere between Seoul and Singapore, learned to read each other's next move before it happened. Lieutenant Commander Otieno tried to run. She stopped him herself. In the aftermath, the very loud, very complicated aftermath involving Singaporean authorities and several phone calls that went to very high levels of several governments, she and Seon-jae stood on the building's external terrace, 47 floors up, and looked at the city. It's over, she said. This part, he said. The legal process is just beginning. Your cover is finished, he said. And there was something in his voice that was not quite grief and not quite relief. Something that had been carrying weight for 3 years and had just finally set it down. It's done. She looked at him. What do you do now? She asked. Without the role? He turned to look at her. The sunlight was making something in his expression very clear and very unguarded in a way she suspected very few people had ever seen. I have some ideas, he said. Are any of them legal? More than before. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. He looked at it like it was something he wanted to put in his pocket. Amara, he said. Don't, she said gently. We still have about 900 complicated things to sort out. Chain of command. Debriefs. The fact that I technically conducted an unsanctioned. I know. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, careful and unhurried, like they had all the time they didn't have. I know there are 900 things. I'm asking about the 901st. She looked at him. Ask me when the 900 are done, she said. He smiled then, a full one, real and rare, and she understood now why he kept it so rarely used. It was the kind of thing that could make a person forget they had somewhere else to be. I'll hold you to that, he said. She turned back to look at the city. How long? She asked. The legal process. Months, he said. Maybe more. And you'll be where? A pause. Wherever you are, he said quietly. She didn't answer. But she also didn't move away. They stood there while the city moved 47 floors below them, and for a moment, just a moment, it was simple. 3 weeks later. Nairobi. She was back in uniform. The debrief had taken 5 days, involved 3 separate intelligence agencies, 2 government liaisons, and 1 very uncomfortable conversation with Admiral Kamau, who had looked at her across a table and said, "You went off script," and she had said, "The script had a mole in it, sir," and there had been a very long silence after which he had said, "Well done, Osei." And she had understood that this was the highest praise she would receive, and it was enough. Lieutenant Commander Otieno was in custody. The document had not been signed. The case that Seon-jae had built for 3 years was in the hands of people who knew what to do with it. It was, by any measurable standard, a success. She was sitting in her apartment in Nairobi, small and bright, with photographs of her family on every surface and a view of the city she loved, drinking tea and trying very hard not to think about a private jet and Singapore by water and the way a man had looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd stopped asking. She was doing fine. She was absolutely fine. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Which she would normally ignore, except that in the last 3 weeks, unknown number had come to mean something specific. She answered. "You're in Nairobi," he said. "Not a question. How do you know where I am?" "I told you. I look up everything." "That's unsettling." "You're drinking chai," he said. "You make it with too much ginger. Your grandmother's recipe." She looked at her cup. Then at her window. Then at the street below, where a black car was parked in a way that was very specifically inconspicuous. "Seon-jae," she said slowly. "I told you," he said, and she could hear the smile in it, warm and certain. "I'd be wherever you are." She put down her cup. She stood. She walked to the window and looked down at the car and the man leaning against it. No suit today, just dark jeans and a jacket, looking up at her window with the kind of expression that made the 900 complicated things feel very far away. He raised a hand in a small wave. She stood there for a moment, looking at him, in the city she loved, in the life she'd built, in the uniform she'd earned, with all the things she was and all the things she'd decided, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. Her phone buzzed with a message. "The 900 things are done. Will you have dinner with me?" She typed back, "You flew to Nairobi for dinner?" His response was immediate. "I flew to Nairobi for you. Dinner is the excuse." She stood at the window for exactly 3 more seconds. Then she put on her shoes. He took her to a place she'd never been, a rooftop restaurant in Westlands, local and unpretentious and completely unlike anything she would have expected him to choose, with Kenyan music playing low and the city laid out around them and food that was so good it made her close her eyes on the first bite. "How did you find this place?" she demanded. "Research," he said, perfectly innocent. "You researched Nairobi restaurants." "I researched everything I could learn about Amara Osei," he said simply. "Which includes the fact that you wrote your sister a message last year saying you were craving nyama choma from that rooftop place in Westlands, and I found the most likely candidate." She stared at him. "You read my messages?" "No," he said, deeply unbothered. "Your sister posts about food." She tagged the location. "Kwabena," she said, with the fondness and exasperation of someone with 4 brothers and a sister who was worse than all of them combined. She would. He was watching her with that look again, the warm, careful, entirely too much of it look that she had been trying not to think about for 3 weeks. "What?" she said. "You," he said simply. "That's not an answer." It's the only one I have. He leaned forward slightly. 3 weeks of the most complicated legal and intelligence processes I've ever been through, and the only thing I wanted consistently was to be sitting across from you. She looked at him. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard, she said, and also I need you to understand that my admiral cannot find out about this. I have friends in quiet places, he said, completely seriously. You're the Korean Mafia, she said. Former, he said. That's not how that works. I'm working on it. His hand moved across the table and settled over hers, warm and deliberate. We can work on it together if you want. She turned her hand over under his. Their fingers laced together like they'd done it before. Like they'd do it again. You're going to be very complicated, she told him. You thrive on complicated, he said. You're a Navy officer who ran an unsanctioned intelligence operation for a former Korean syndicate head because your extraction backup had a mole in it. You love complicated. She pointed at him with her free hand. That is an accurate and extremely annoying observation. He was smiling. That full smile, the rare one, the one she was starting to want to see so often it was becoming a problem. Amara, he said. What? Stop thinking about reasons, this is difficult. I'm not thinking about reasons. You're making a list, he said. I can see it. You have a very specific expression when you're making a list. You did it in Singapore before you kissed me back. I did not make a list before. Item 1, he said, raising an eyebrow, chain of command. Item 2, mission parameters. Item 3. Okay, she said. Fine. I was making a list. I know. He squeezed her hand once. Make it. Write it all down. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him across the table in the warm Nairobi night, with the music low and the city bright around them, and she thought, this is real. Not the jet, not the danger, not the high-stakes impossible situation. This. Him looking at her like she was someone worth staying for. Give me time, she said. As much as you need, he said. And she believed him. She was walking back to her building at midnight. He'd insisted on the walk, and she'd insisted on walking herself home, and they'd compromised with him walking 3 steps behind her, which she found both annoying and charming, when her phone rang. Admiral Kamau. At midnight. She answered immediately. Osei. His voice was clipped and tight in a way she recognized as the voice he used when something had gone wrong at a level above her clearance. Where are you? Nairobi, sir. As filed. Are you? He paused. A pause that contained a great deal. Are you with anyone? She stopped walking. Behind her, she heard Seon-jae's footsteps also stop. What's happened? She said. A silence. The Singapore arrests, the Admiral said slowly. Otieno's people. It appears there's a problem. What kind of problem? The kind, he said, where we think someone on the outside activated a contingency. Her blood went cold. A contingency against Park Seon-jae, the Admiral said. Osei, if you know where he is. She turned around. The street behind her was empty. 3 steps where Seon-jae had been standing. Empty air, the faint scuff of shoes on pavement, a shadow that had been there and was now simply not. Sir, she said, her voice completely steady while her entire body went cold, I need a full briefing. Right now. I know. There's a car coming for you. She stood in the empty street. He had heard. He had heard the call, or he had seen something, or his instincts, 3 years of being the most dangerous person in the room, had told him something was coming and he had moved before it arrived. He was gone. Just like that. And she had no idea if it was to protect himself. Or to protect her. Her phone buzzed. 1 message. Unknown number. 4 words. I'll explain everything. Wait. She stared at the message. Then the lights of the car appeared at the end of the street, coming for her, and Nairobi hummed around her, and somewhere in this city or perhaps already beyond it, Park Seon-jae was moving through the dark with reasons she didn't know yet and a promise she wasn't sure she could trust. Wait. She had 4 brothers who had taught her patience. She had a Navy career that had taught her precision. She had 3 weeks and 1 dinner and a kiss on a waterfront in Singapore that had taught her something she didn't have a word for yet. She got in the car. She was going to find him. And when she did, to be continued in part 2. Did you see that ending coming? Where do you think Seon-jae went? And are you Team Amara or Team Seon-jae? Hit that like button if you need part 2 right now and subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops, because things are about to get so much more intense. Fire.